Wait for everybody to get back. The bell tolls for thee. Yeah, it's warm. I'm not sure why that is. Yeah.
I said one thing.
Sure.
Just. Acknowledge that.
It's an issue. Yeah. We are live. We're ready to go.
This is the May 18th, 2026 New Garden Township Board of Supervisors meeting. I'll call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Brand. The board held an executive session prior to this meeting, starting at 6 o'clock. Next, we have the public comment section of the agenda. First, public comment on non-agenda items, 3-minute time limit, followed by public comment on agenda items, 3-minute time limit. Is there anybody that would like to make any public comment? Great. Moving into the minutes, included in the board materials of the minutes from last month's meeting dated April 27th, 2026. Is there a motion to approve such minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Treasurer's report, we have unpaid invoices in the amount of $315,559.86 and paid invoices in the amount of $441,354.22. Is there a motion to approve such unpaid and paid invoices? Steve, do you want to make your caveat?
I'm good. I'll make a motion to pay the bills in the total amount of $756,914.08.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Chris, moving into the monthly department report, anything you want to add there?
So the full monthly report is in the packet, nothing significant. And then in terms of just a calendar update, the follow-on from the April meeting is continuing to narrow the final adoption hearing for the zoning ordinance for the June 15th board monthly meeting. I believe that's what we're still tracking on for advertisements on. So for people to keep on their calendar, that'll be the date of the meeting.
Great, thank you. Next, moving into new business, we have the subdivision land development ordinance review. Do you want to introduce that, Chris?
Yes. So many moons ago, when the township submitted its RFP for the zoning ordinance, that also included a component of it for updating the subdevelopment and land development ordinance, or subdivision and land development ordinance, excuse me, SALDO as we refer to. So if you think about it, these two ordinances kind of go hand in hand, where SALDO really plays off of your zoning ordinance, but it's more about kind of the more narrow topics about the aesthetic, the design in terms of what the potential land development looks like, more so than how it's zoned, how it's utilized on the land, and some of the more stringent methods in your zoning ordinance. So we knew we needed to update both documents. So SALDO needed to start after the zoning ordinance process took effect. And we have been doing that over the course of the last several months in terms of we've already folded it out in front of our planning commission. Then tonight would be the first public review for the Board of Supervisors, but the document that you have in your packet tonight has already been not just reviewed by the Planning Commission, but also been reviewed by Township staff. That's inclusive of our codes, Community Development Department, our Public Works, other staff members as required, as well as Township engineers and Township legal. So you have a very clean document to look at for tonight in the draft packet there. And of course, Samantha here to show us the presentation for considerations and kind of some items to just understand about the nature of the two. So Samantha, whenever you are ready, I'll pull up your presentation here.
Great. I actually, Chris, I just shared my screen. Can you all see it?
Not
Or
in
will you
here,
need
so I'll
to?
have to.
Okay.
I'll do the
No
screen sharing
worries.
here if you want to do that. If you can take yours down.
Totally fine. So while Chris is getting the presentation set up, he gave a great introduction. I'm here tonight. My name is Samantha McLean. I'm a project manager with Michael Baker International. We're the consultant firm that was hired by the township to help facilitate the zoning update and then now the subdivision and land development ordinance update. I've been before you a few times before, but it's been a while. So good to see everyone virtually. On the next slide, I go over what we want to accomplish in today's meeting. So on the next slide, Chris, we have a brief agenda, starting with just a brief background. Chris went over this a little bit, but we just want to level set in terms of what the saldo is and why it needs to be updated. Then we'll go into the changes between the existing and the proposed saldo, and then have a discussion on some of the more notable changes between the existing and proposed saldo, and some discussion points that we'd love to hear your feedback on. And then we'll end with just some next steps around the adoption process. So starting with background, if you want to go forward 2 slides. You all know this, but just for anyone that is tuning in tonight or is in the audience, just briefly, what is a saldo? So it is the subdivision and land development ordinance, and it regulates just that. So subdivisions are defined as a division of a lot into 2 or more lots. And then a land development is an improvement of a lot or lots for 2 or more residential buildings or a non-residential building. So when you think about a lot of the development that happens in a municipality, a lot of it falls under the purview of the saldo. Basically, almost everything except one single family home. So it's pretty important. The saldo contents, beyond the design and construction standards, it also dictates what plans and materials need to be submitted in an application for a subdivision and land development, and the process for review and approval. It also goes over a lot of the agreements and guarantees between the township and the developer for improvements and maintenance. I should note that a lot of the content around those agreements and guarantees, and in terms of the saldo in general, is dictated by the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code. So a lot of that is referenced in your saldo and relates to the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code. However, the municipality has the authority to create the design standards. That is the bulk of the saldo. So on the next slide, we just went through the zoning process, so community members are very familiar with that, but we wanted to spend some time just explaining how the saldo and zoning, they're different, but they work in tandem. So the zoning, that regulates requirements based on district and specifically use requirements. So the location of those uses, density of those uses, the setbacks, building coverages, dimensions, etc. And when an application needs to seek relief from the zoning ordinance, it seeks a variance through the zoning hearing board. The saldo, on the other hand, the standards apply throughout the municipality, and it's all about, as Chris mentioned, that design, so lot layout, design of streets, sidewalks, recreation areas, etc. And and any additional required improvements. When a applicant needs to seek relief from something from the saldo, they seek a waiver from the Board of Supervisors. So they definitely work together, but they are separate. And tonight we are talking about the saldo. So on the next slide, we go over briefly the need for an update, which Chris set up. And we just went over the zoning and saldo work hand in hand. If you update one and you don't update the other, you risk kind of having references that don't relate to any sections because they've been updated. And you want to make sure that, they're both updated kind of around the same time so that there is consistency. In addition to that, your saldo was adopted last in 1999. And since then, there have been advances in best practices for design standards, particularly around street design. So we wanted to make sure that your saldo referenced the current standards, the PennDOT standards, AASHTO standards, and guidance. We did hear from staff in the beginning of the process that a lot of your saldo is in good shape. So we really looked at this update as kind of modernizing the places where that needed to be modernized, but really not meddling if that section was working well. And then lastly, the goals and the priorities of the township have evolved. Your comprehensive plan talks about connections and, street design and making sure that it's connected to community amenities. So we wanted to make sure that your saldo reflected that. So with that, we'll go over an overview of the changes, starting with kind of high level reorganization. So something too that we looked at is making sure that your ordinance was easy to navigate and understand, both for staff, but then also developers, community members, you all who are reading and interpreting the ordinance. So your existing ordinance has 10 different articles. You can see that on the right. Your proposed saldo has just 2 fewer articles, but we didn't get rid of any content. We just organized it in a way that we thought made a little bit more sense. So for example, we combined your title, purpose, interpretation with jurisdiction and control into a Article 1, a general provisions chapter. Some other kind of bigger changes is your town development option. This we integrated into design and improvement standards for mixed use development, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And that's just in your design and improvement standards article. But other than that, not too many changes here. On the next slide, we have some other minor changes. So these fall into 3 different buckets: administrative, cleanup items, and alignment with zoning. So in terms of administrative kind of minor changes, we worked with the township to understand their current review process and what would work best for township staff. So we modernized application requirements based on what we heard. So reducing number of paper copies, electronic submission, et cetera. This is just to make the process kind of more streamlined and make sure the township gets what it needs for that review. And then in a couple of places in the saldo, there's reference to outside organizations or agencies, such as different Chester County agencies that need to review and provide kind of feedback, recommendation. They don't have any decision-making authority, but review those saldo applications. Though that list was outdated, names had changed, so we cleaned that up. In terms of other cleanup items, there were some repetitive sections that we consolidated where we thought that there was confusing or unclear language. We tried to clarify it as much as possible. As I mentioned, we updated references to engineering standards and guides. Rather than trying to capture some of those engineering standards in the text of the saldo itself, it is best practice to just reference the latest PennDOT guidance, because then they'll update it, and this way your saldo is always, referencing the PennDOT standards rather than you needing to amend your saldo. And then lastly, with cleanup items, there were a lot of appendices that were listed with your saldo that were not referenced in your saldo. So we removed any kind of irrelevant appendices. that weren't referenced in the text. And then finally, in terms of aligning it with zoning, one important thing is we wanted to make sure that the definitions that were used in the saldo were consistent with what was in the zoning. So there were some definition updates. And then we updated any references to districts or cross-references to articles in the zoning ordinance. On the next page, so some other sections, kind of major changes. These changes on the screen were to align with, best practices or comprehensive plan goals that we read. So one was to introduce a section around trails and shared use pathways, specifically standards for buffers in compliance with national guidance. Additionally, bikeway requirements. There's no requirement to install, bike amenities, but if they are proposed, the saldo now has a reference to national guidance for what that should look like if it is installed. And then finally, crosswalks, we just made reference to modern accessibility guidelines. Next slide. These sections are were either added or modified. So your initial saldo or your existing saldo has a mobile home article. When we were reviewing it during the zoning ordinance update, we realized some of those standards actually made more sense in the zoning ordinance. So those were moved over to the zoning ordinance. However, any of the design standards for mobile homes, or we renamed it manufactured homes to be in alignment with HUD terminology, was maintained in your saldo. Something that kind of did the opposite was that we moved your lighting article from your zoning to your saldo. It is more of a kind of a design standard, an article, and requires kind of more flexibility that the saldo allows compared to the zoning. And then finally, as I mentioned, there were some appendices that you had, but that weren't referenced in the text. But one thing that we really did want to update was the native plants or plants and trees list. So instead of trying to update that list, based on what we know, we went to a very reliable source. We Conserve PA. They maintain a list of native plants and trees that are appropriate for planting. They identify which trees are appropriate for street tree planting, which ones are not. So it's a good reference. Okay, so this next section goes into, so we just discussed some of the changes that are kind of more minor, not super substantial. This next part, we're going to get into more of the substantial changes, and then there are some discussion questions, so I'm going to pause and try to get feedback after each topic. So the first set of kind of substantial changes is around your community recreation requirements. So in your existing saldo, it requires a set number of acres per dwelling unit, or per number of dwelling units. So if you have 1 acre, 1 acre is required for 10 dwelling units or less, 2 acres for 11 to 24 dwellings, etc. And then if the land cannot be dedicated, there's that fee in lieu option, and that was set as 50% of the fair market value of the entire tract multiplied by the number of acres required for recreation. When we looked at this section, we did it through the lens of the municipality's planning code, which states that the municipality has the authority to require recreation dedication in the land development, but it must be based on a open space or parks plan. So we looked at your township open space plan and used the formula. Well, we tried to see if the formula matched what you had, and it didn't. So we used the formula from that plan that was based on anticipating 2020 needs, which is the closest year that we could get to. And that stated that 8 acres of park space should be provided for every 1,000 residents. So we updated the formula to reflect that. And then in terms of the fee in lieu, we updated this to just a best practice that we've seen in municipalities, and that seems to work, which is that the fair market value of the land, otherwise that would have been required to be dedicated, is the fee in lieu that's determined at the time of the filing of the subdivision application. There is additional guidance for if that fair market value is disputed by the board and what that process looks like. But that is the proposed fee in lieu. On the next slide, all right, so I guess I'll pause here. Sorry, if you want to go back. Do you have any feedback, any questions about this change?
Yeah. Hi, Samantha. How are you?
Hi, good.
Define parks. I mean, is that it? Would that be trails? Would it be, or just could it be open land? I mean, how do you, the word
Yes.
park, the word park is very open.
Yes, so we do, the Saldo refers to it as a community recreation area and common open space. And we have that defined as a parcel or parcels of land, an area of water, or a combination of land and water that is designated and intended for the use or enjoyment of residents or employees of a development. It does not include streets, off-street parking areas, sidewalks, and areas set aside for public facilities. It can include trails and shared use pathways.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that it would include trails, because some people look at that differently. As long as that's written in there, I think that's fine.
Right.
And then the fair market of, in the fee in lieu of the fair market value of the land otherwise required to have been dedicated as determined at the time of filing of the subdivision application. So who makes the determination?
So it is, let me pull up the exact language. It is determined by
Fair
the
market value?
Yeah, so that the fair market value is determined by, is the responsibility of the applicant. But it says it shall be acceptable to the governing body. And then if the board wants to dispute the applicant's presentation of the fair market value, it can retain a certified appraiser at the applicant's cost to verify or adjust the fair market value to the appraiser's value. So ultimately, it's on the applicant to present their case, but then the board has the option to dispute it.
Okay, so as long as there's a mechanism in place, that would be fine, because fair market value may vary throughout the township and or neighboring townships as well. So they, again, that's sort of a broad term that is open and subjective.
Yes, so I think what we were thinking was that it's the parcel or parcels that where the development is taking place. If X amount of acres of that development of that parcel were to be dedicated, but instead of being dedicated, there is a fee in lieu. It would be the fair market value of X% of that parcel based on the number of acres required.
Okay, so it would just be if a developer comes into, built 20 houses on 20 acres and he paid X amount of dollars, that would be the fair market value. I think that's a fair process. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So in your current Saldo, you have mixed-use development standards and streetscape standards for the UD district. We knew this had to change because the updated zoning no longer has the UD district, but we still felt like the Saldo is an opportunity to have design standards for development and have it look the way that you want. So, but it's not necessarily appropriate to apply it to every land development in every district. So since you had standards for the UD district, which is now the same geography as the mixed use corridor and mixed use corridor light districts, we updated the language to say, these mixed use development standards apply to the mixed use corridor light, and it's standards for development within those districts of a certain size. So it's like if you're doing just a few lots or something, it's not applicable, but it's for kind of major development. And those standards are about site layout, building articulation. So not getting just like a big flat facade, having the building be articulated so that it kind of looks like a few different buildings, put together. Public amenities, building material, roof types, and pedestrian circulation. So right now, they're referenced in the design standards, but the language lives in, if you're following along, in Appendix B. So our discussion questions for you tonight are, one, are all of these standards needed? Are some of them too excessive for what the township's looking for? And then lastly, is the geography correct? So right now we have it as mixed use corridor and mixed use corridor light because that's the same area as the UD district, but should it only be for the mixed use corridor? Should we consider it for Village Gateway? Before opening it up, something I will say is we took your existing standards and kind of did a review of those, and anything that was very that didn't have any meat to it, that just kind of encouraged something or seemed also too overbearing, like there were standards in there about like the exact type of light fixture required, we removed. So we've already done kind of our assessment of these standards based on what we've seen working in other communities. So you don't have all the standards before you today to review, but there are some that we left in for discussion, especially around like building material. This is an area where we think that might be potentially too excessive for the needs of the township, but wanted to leave it in there for discussion. So I will pause and open it up.
I'll start at the end. I would absolutely consider the Village Gateway. I would absolutely consider the Village Gateway, yes.
Okay.
On the overbearing or overreaching, I would question building materials, articulation. I think site layout has a merit for circulation. I think public amenities is important. Roof types could go or stay, and pedestrian circulation should stay. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree with that. Especially with Village Gateway, because that's, the architecturally interesting kind of character of New Garden that you would want to keep. And then for the mixed use corridor, I think, is there a way to make these standards kick in once you start developing a town center area? Because it seems like they're less necessary if you're just building a standard, subdivision. But if you want something with, kind of a aesthetic draw like you would for a town center, is that something you would be able to force them to kick in, or are we just going to assume that all of mixed use corridor is going to be a town center? Just like one long town center along 41?
Yes, so it's something that we could certainly talk about. I think because right now it's applicable to new construction, renovation of a building that's been 50% or more damaged or destroyed, additions and multifamily dwellings. that applicability can be altered. I think something that I'd want to think about and talk to township staff and the solicitor about a little more is we don't have we would need to define town center because that's not we don't have that as a use or a defined term. So we would want to make sure that we're applying a definition to it, whether it's a certain amount of acres or a certain amount of units or something. But we could certainly look into that.
Are these the kind of things that can be waived by the township if we find a developer that would work with us to kind of get the aesthetic so that we're, okay.
Yeah, so anything in the Saldo waiver can be sought. That's something that we've heard from other municipalities is that sometimes they want to keep certain things in as a discussion, kind of a discussion point. So right now, and I'm just looking at the language, in most of this language, we use shalls, because, that's how most ordinances are written. There is an opportunity if you want this to be more of like a guidance document, to just have, say may or are encouraged to. It still gives you something in writing to have the conversation piece, but would avoid the need to seek a waiver.
Could we also look at adding it to the actual village of Tufkenneman? Because I think that would be even more important to kind of retain that aesthetic.
Yeah. So the village center.
Yeah. And this, I think a lot of the stuff with the village center and the village gateway would also kind of cross-pollinate with any input the historic commission has about what they would like to see. I know that they don't like to, tell people what color shutters paint, but obviously, but that's something I think for the overall design aesthetic, if we could keep that.
Could I ask a question about, so I've heard in terms of districts, village center, village gateway, mixed use corridor, what are the board's thoughts on the mixed use corridor light district? That is in the same area as the UD district, but I know just from conversations through the zoning process that the intent is different. So want to take your thoughts.
I think for light, personally, for light, I think it would be less important, just because I think that's what we were trying to do, less residential perhaps, and maybe more services. Like mixed services. So that I think isn't really, we could do, less things. Like I think the building articulation would come naturally just from having different entities, but at the same time, it would kind of be nice to have something other than just your kind of standard office building or the flat facade and all that stuff. But again, you're either driving down 7 or 41, you're not really going to see much of it. So.
Yeah, I would agree with David as well.
And I guess just to circle back, we heard a little bit about maybe building materials, articulation, maybe being too much, wanting to keep public amenities, pedestrian circulation, site layout, roof types could go or stay. Any additional feedback?
Can we mandate Avondale brownstone for everything forever? Yeah. That'll get some jobs at the quarry.
I don't know. I feel like when we were going through the zoning changes, that this was like most of the questions the public had was around these standards. So I feel like removing them or making them lighter kind of contradicts like what we've been saying to the public.
Yeah.
So I would actually like to see a draft written, like what your recommendations are. And we can compare that to the original and kind of be able to see, is there somewhere in between? Because oftentimes when you remove these things, the developer's just not gonna
Mhm.
do it.
Yep, that's a good point. I will say in the draft, that's May 13th is the version. Appendix B is the cleaned up kind of what we ended with
Okay.
list. So if you wanted to kind of look at the PDF of the appendix that you have now, and compare,
Do a side by side, and then maybe mark it up and scan it and get it to Chris.
Well, also too, the one thing is you can leave it in there. So think of it like a kind of a top down, because it's in your saldo, you can choose to waiver it or not based off of the
Right.
conditionality of the development. So it's better to have it all in there,
I,
as well as kind of like you're basically picking like all of the samples, if you will, of the types of materials that you would like. You might settle on one specifically, but at least you have that ability to direct them, say, no, for this one, we want this.
I
Or for this one, we don't, and you get say because it's in the saldo.
I agree. I wouldn't,
Okay.
my recommendation would not be to
So-
make it like
Just-
less
Just leave them in.
strict.
Correct.
It would be to leave it in,
Yep.
and I don't think we've had any.
Well, the level of strictness is your ability to waiver it based off of the request from the developer. And not all developers are created equal. So as a recommendation from staff, it never hurts to default to have it in there to start with.
Right.
And then the discussion about what would be seen as, yeah,
Yep.
we can remove this part. Yep.
Okay.
That actually it helps provide for leverage during those discussions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we, I would be okay with that. So we landed on the mixed-use corridor, Village Gateway and Village Center.
And those are because we have actually, I don't know how many, is it 6 mixed-use districts?
Correct.
Of which a portion of them are more focused on residential, some of them are more focused on commercial. It's just what level of applicability do you want for the mixed-use districts, as Samantha was laying out? Like I said, as a default, it never hurts to have it with all of them, and then you can kind of walk away from it based off of what you're being proposed with. It makes life a little bit simpler when you're trying to direct traffic from staff. Oh, you can't do that over there, but you can do that over there. But it's just, no, it all applies. And then when you come forward with, then we get to have that determination component to it.
Yeah. The use, the density, the setbacks, all of that is in the zoning.
Correct.
And these are just supplemental regulations.
Yes. And that's what I'm saying. Like it's,
Correct. Yeah.
and that's why I would say like it helps from a staff perspective to make it somewhat standard. So then you don't have to pick and choose your district
Right.
specifically.
Agreed.
Okay. Any additional thoughts on this section? Okay. And I think the last thing we wanted to talk to you all about is your tree requirements. So we did not propose any changes to this besides updating the appropriate tree species or native plantings list, which is Appendix A, which I went over. It's the We Conserve PA list. Your existing saldo has a requirement for shade trees if a land development is creating a public street. So does not apply if it's a private street. But we did hear some concerns from township staff about maintenance of trees and some issues that they cause. When we were reviewing this, we, besides hearing that concern from staff, we didn't hear much else. So we left it as is. It is pretty minimal compared to other municipalities. So, our team would not necessarily recommend removing it. But what we have done in the past, and I will have to verify with your staff if this is something available to you, but we know some municipalities do have a landscaping consultant or engineer, landscape architect that reviews their plans. And sometimes just adding the requirement that all shade trees are subject to approval, by the landscaping consultant kind of takes care of some of the concerns that might come up if that the township has mentioned in terms of like the right species, how it's planted, where it's planted. So wanted to open this up for discussion, how you would like to proceed.
And part of this is under consideration that we don't have like a shade tree commission or committee like some other municipalities organized to provide for, as well as like obviously we don't have an on-staff like arborist or somebody to provide that. So if there is one where you want to have that level of validity about what they're proposing, I would recommend that there is a kind of a at the cost of the developer to provide for some of the recommendations. So it offsets us having to kind of source that material because it's very highly nuanced subject matter expertise that you're soliciting for here. What we kept intact was the actual list. And this is based off of the township has done like a botanical inventory. There's kind of a full assessment of like, we'll call them more like kind of prized, more like less invasive, obviously more endemic species to the area. So the list has already been kind of crafted. It's just what they propose for it and someone to kind of do the comparative analysis that it makes sense to do so.
Samantha, I don't see ash trees listed in the Exhibit A, and our neighborhood has ash trees and they're all dying, so it's good it's not in there.
Yeah, I'm not an arborist or landscape architect, but I can imagine that's, you know, part of the reason why. I also know that right now, and this is something that I'm not sure the existing standards don't cover this, but you know, some municipalities have considered mandating like that you can't plant like monospecies, right? You can't have one species proposed for an entire street, right? Because if one tree gets sick, the next tree gets sick. But that would be something that potentially, you know, by saying it's subject to approval by a subject matter expert, they would provide that feedback. So it seems to me that maybe, you know, keeping it as is and then maybe adding, and we'll work with the township staff to figure out what makes sense, but adding some language that would put the burden on the applicant to kind of provide that assessment and, you know, cover the cost of an analysis by a landscaping consultant. Am I getting that
Yeah.
right?
I think that's good. And I do think there is a need for shade trees. It cools the blacktop, which in turn cools the stormwater runoff.
But
Improves the quality of water. But when you can't see and they're hanging over and you're trying to drive into your neighborhood, it becomes a nuisance. I understand both sides of it. Yes.
mhm.
I mean,
Correct. Invasive species.
for people who are concerned about speeding, to Steve's comment, studies have shown that areas that have a lot of canopy and trees overhanging kind of have a psychological thing that kind of make people slow down. They're more concerned as opposed to just like a flat, unpaved area where they can just
Wide open. You
crank it. Yeah. So
Well, those were the kind of major changes and topics we wanted to discuss. So in terms of next steps, or I guess, yeah, I'll go through next steps and then if there's any additional conversation, you know, we will work with staff. We'll make sure that we get all these comments compiled and updated to reflect these changes to the shade tree requirements, but then also update those mixed use development standards to reflect the changes that we discussed, particularly them applying to, you know, all the mixed use districts. And we'll update the draft CELDO, and then really the next step is similar to the zoning, you all starting the 45-day review period and sending it to Chester County Planning Commission for their review. And then following that review period, a public hearing and vote on adoption. So with that, you know, if there's any additional conversation or questions, I'm happy to answer them, but this was really helpful.
Does the board need to take a vote to start the 45-day period? No. Great.
So we would bring this back, I believe, at the June meeting with some of those draft
Yeah.
revisions. And then June would be, if you're satisfied with the changes and everything to date, then we would, it's very similar to how we did the zoning ordinance, do the same, essentially submission for final review by the Chester County Planning Commission, and then choose that 45-day out date from the June meeting, which would likely be obviously sometime in August to adopt.
Okay,
Sounds good. Thank you, Samantha.
yes,
Okay, thank you all. Have a good rest of your meeting.
thank you.
Great presentation. Next, we're going to move into the data center overview. Chris?
Okay, great. Everybody hear me? All right, sounds great. Obviously, massive crowd tonight. I thought saying data center out loud just kind of attracted and pulled people out from all of the coffers here to protest in nature. But basically, the construct of tonight's discussion is to just start having an out loud conversation about this somewhat highly visible and public interest discussion topic in the Commonwealth right now. Not to do any sort of disproving or miss anything, but just kind of narrate what it is and then what the township needs to prepare for in terms of crafting a more built-for-purpose ordinance that's kind of in parallel, but also kind of separate as well from the zoning ordinance, because it carries with it as a use a significant amount of criterion for exactness of regulatory items for consideration. And we'll talk about some of the process of what that means. But I also like to start kind of just generally of, what is it, kind of where did it come from? Why Pennsylvania all of a sudden it seems like overnight? And just kind of talk about what it means for localities to anchor this type of use. And like I said, just to kind of open up a dialogue. And this is a full caveat that the township has not received interest from data center developers. We're not currently in any sort of submitted land development. This is part of what I believe every Pennsylvania township, at least for that matter, as well as first, second-class townships, all municipal types right now are conducting in their own municipalities. Everybody's having this conversation 2,000 plus times over throughout the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's just our turn to do it as well. So with that, I'll start off with just an overview of just what it is. It's a gigantic box, and when I mean gigantic, it's the biggest box you can probably imagine, and it's full from basically floor to ceiling with servers. So it in and of itself is a center of data, if you would. But with that, it's also involved with a build out of, it could be several data centers on a campus, kind of clustering type effect, as well as all the on-site infrastructure resources needed to create kind of a campus. So you'll generally never get kind of just one consideration for the box right up to the property line. It's usually you need enough real estate to put maybe one or two, as well as some of the on-site facilities. So the tract areas of what we're talking about are significant here. And that's proofed out in terms of what's actually going on right now in terms of what is the market demand for quote unquote a 2026 average data center. And because of the level of compute required and what you're needed to build, the cost to build, to kind of quote unquote from a developer standpoint, kind of make whatever profit margin you're trying to do, bigger in this case is better. So with that, average is the going rate for a data center days is about 1 million square feet. So kind of put that into context, it's about 23 acres is the box, not necessarily also the land required around that box to house one data center. There was a project from the locality area that I came from in Northern Virginia. It's called the Prince William Digital Gateway, and that was 37 data centers. So it's one where you can imagine just how much square feet. There's about 81 million square feet of data centers in that one area, right up against the old Manassas Battlefield Park there and a couple state forests as well. If you've been following the news, there's that a guy who's appeared on Shark Tank for the last several seasons, and Kevin Leary is a billionaire trying to do what's called a Stratos project, which out there in Box Elder, Utah, that is 40,000 what is it, 40,000 acres, if you will. So imagine that an acre is 43,000 square feet. So to do the math, that is that amount of presence of data centers within that site. Specifically, I think it's 2,000 square feet, or excuse me, 2,000 acres of data center, or 86 million square feet. So these are significant impacts on a local community, because what do data centers do? They use a lot of energy. They take up a lot of space. They're very big, not necessarily in terms of their footprint, but their height. They create, what is it, the hum, the noise, because if you're running that much cooling in HVAC units in order to cool all the servers, you need a lot of power generation to service those. So if you've ever been up close to one, and of course we don't have a large audience, how many people have been within the vicinity of a data center? Understand what it sounds like. Have ever been inside of one? Understand what that sounds like. It sounds like if you go outside of an airport terminal and you just kind of stand on the flight tarmac, the whirl of the engines, that's what it sounds like kind of right next door to one. So you can imagine hearing that 24/7, 365 outside your house every time you came out of it. So it's a significant issue. And this is probably the one where most people cite for the daily quality of life. It's the noise that they create. But what's now people are seeing in terms of the saturation of this burgeoning market is you're starting to see obviously a lot more impact on our power generation, because we broker power regionally. We don't broker it based off of individual facilities and utility providers. So people are starting to see going rates for electricity rates increasing across the board, because you're just having much larger consumers on the energy side. And if you are having more consumers being in the form of not a household, but a collection of households in terms of how much energy they consume. I believe they said 1 million square feet is roughly about, can't remember how many thousands of households, but it's like putting in the energy grid like a small city as a data center. And then also the water, because you need all that coolant as well, and that water has to go through a level of intake and discharge in order to provide for it back into the disposal side. So all that's to say is, it's probably pretty important to understand how you need to regulate all of this. And right now, it's one where the conversation is, well, what regulations matter? Which ones are the right regulations? Which ones are the wrong regulations? There's so much noise out there, so you have to kind of sift through all of the stuff that is and is not considered to be something that you can base your regulations on without it being potentially legally tested. And even then, it probably will still be anyway. So it's kind of like another way to saying, like, you're trying to hit the right mark to say that you're protecting your community to the maximum extent possible. So let's take a look at some pictures. Some of these are models based off of artist renditions of what it will look like from a planning standpoint, and some of these are just aerials from construction. But as you can see, kind of the differentiations in size between the surrounding areas. You're talking about very impactful neighbors. And of course, if you're familiar with Northern Virginia doesn't necessarily have like, oh, here's my industrial district, I'm going to put everything over here. They have in their zoning, which is a construct called an overlay district. It's very different than how Pennsylvania does it, but that means that you can kind of shoehorn these overlays into these areas that make sense, which means now you have impactful neighbors towards residential areas. A topic of which New Garden has immune to. We've never had that discussion here locally, right? But with that, it's good to understand this kind of, I'll call it presence, because that's also going to make you understand where you want them to go, what the kind of districts that you have provided for them. So we'll talk about that in a second, because we have already actually gone through the zoning ordinance discussion in terms of updating our uses. Data centers was one of them. I also like to talk about where things came from. So Northern Virginia is pretty synonymous with data centers because they were kind of the first to market to kind of scale the presence of data centers. It's not based out of kind of just a happenstance, if you will. It was very intentional. It was a deliberate process there. There's a reason they have the most. But Loudoun County is kind of we'll call it the largest cluster. Prince William County, which is just to the south of Loudoun County, Virginia, is also a very large clustering area. But with that, the reason they have it there, it was because of a deliberate economic development strategy in the mid-2000s. So they were kind of dealing with an issue. It was around the late 2010s for them. It was kind of the post-dot-com bubble, as well as the kind of the proceedings post-recession and kind of what do we do to kind of recover economically. And they chose Loudoun County specifically, this area, because leading up to the dot-com bubble, they had a large build out of fiber optic cabling. It was actually subsidized by the federal government. So the National Science Foundation gave them a lot of like wiring up through the area from DC all the way out to Loudoun County, Virginia, which I don't know if anybody's been or had been in Loudoun County at that time in '96. It was pretty much mostly Dulles International and a bunch of farmlands around it. There wasn't a lot of stuff going on there. And then with that, they had the location of AOL as far as the headquarters. So they had this kind of, at the time, obviously the largest, one of the comms providers at the top to build out their facility. And also that meant there was other kind of daisy chaining of other facilities aside. So they just started building kind of tech corporate boxes in the middle of Loudoun County, Virginia. And of course, you know, what happened? You get the dot-com bubble, the industry moves out. We still have all of this wiring. We still have all these structures. What could go in these things? And start thinking about that. But they sat vacant for almost a decade. So what they ended up doing was creating a strategy to harness that. And during the time, of course, technology is always proceeding to improve. Software as a service type functionality is getting built out. You get your iPhones, you start building out the need for cloud-based data services. Hey, come over here in Loudoun County. We already have all these facilities. You actually don't have to do a lot of tenant improvements. You know, start infilling into all of these large structures. And then also, the state, the Commonwealth, participated or enacted policy, which at the state level meant that they were going to give a tax exemption for, in this case, the business equipment, which is all of the compute equipment inside the center of itself. So the state is kind of waiving that because they want to kind of win the day with the industry coming into Virginia. They want to win that business. One thing to remember about that is although the state waived it, localities still have the ability to do it. So at the time, if the state hadn't waived it, there's like a double tapping fee, if you will, for the taxation on equipment. When the state legislated it away, the localities kept it. So Virginia localities still have what's called a business personal property tax. They can tax on computer equipment. So there is even a hyper incentive for localities to propose these zoning uses because they're now taxing on all of that business equipment and not sharing it with anybody. It goes right back to the locality. So it doesn't go to the state and then come back. It comes right into, in this case, Loudoun County. And what that meant is Loudoun County got to set the rate because there isn't one. So they put it about $4 per square foot, which by today's standard, when they have almost 51 million plus square feet of data centers, they get about, I believe up until this point, about 1.1 billion as a county in annual revenue just from data center server equipment. And they have about a $2 billion budget. So half the revenues come from data centers. So at least in terms of understanding the why, that kind of feeds into the why. They had existing vacant facilities, underutilized infrastructure, state incentives. They had a kind of a large available tech workforce, close proximity to federal government. So you have natural large consumers. They had incentivized tax revenues locally as well as zoning. And all that kind of led to, from basically late 2000s, right around 2010 until today, this a decade and a half ramp up of becoming the largest data center capital in the world. And that's kind of how it happened. And of course, you can see that in the aerials. This is kind of what I'm talking about. All those large white rectangular structures. Some of them can be warehouses, but for the most part, those are all data centers. And they're just north of Dulles International here. This is the Route 28 corridor. So if you imagine it, Leesburg, Virginia is up here, DC is down here. This is a north-south connector. And as you come into Prince William County, this is the same Route 28. Here it is over here. This is the northern Prince William County, so like the Manassas, Virginia area, as well as kind of the sister city of the capital, if you will, which is northern Prince William County. And I'm just very familiar with this use because I used to serve a municipal jurisdiction over here, and I actually lived right around here as well, kind of amongst it all. So just very familiar of just living within an area that has a hyper build out of hyperscale data centers and what that means to be a resident in those areas. So why in Pennsylvania? Why are we getting this today? So data centers aren't new in Pennsylvania. However, the size of the new ones are new in Pennsylvania because historically, you know, we're familiar with the fact that you'll have corporate centers, financial institution, or some other large tech company they might need outside of their hoteling space for workers, on-site server space to be able to govern all their data. So data centers were by definition a use because the way that they're defined, which is I think something over 10,000 square feet for the purpose of housing all the data equipment. And so if I had a secondary structure as like an out structure on my campus for data centers, by definition, I have a data center. So there's already data centers in Chester County, as well as the surrounding Philadelphia metropolitan region. But they're kind of referred to as that old guard retail size data center. And then all of a sudden, overnight, we're getting these kind of constant influx of applications over the course of the last several months. Well, why? Well, your state asked for it. How many people remember that landmark legislation and where they were when the 2021 Computer Data Center Sales and Use Tax Exemption Program was enacted in Act 25 by your General Assembly, right? Yeah, no, it probably didn't announce that across the board that it was coming. So this was a decision made in 2021 by the state legislators for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Your legislation representatives voted upon, I don't know where it shook down, but that's where it came from, because with no local presence of business personal property tax in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania afforded to townships, and the state saying, no, we're giving it away too, the industry goes, wait a second, this whole state over here, I don't have to pay any of this stuff anymore. Well, now I'm even more motivated to go into a new market, and that's kind of by design. It undercuts the markets in other areas and pulls that incentive over. You have to do something drastic to get the business, and this is what the Pennsylvania as a Commonwealth did. So with that, what does that mean in terms of how much is kind of lost at the table when it comes to revenues being generated for it? So per data center, I pulled this from one that was assessed value of about $850 million, because that's pretty average for a 1 million square foot data center in terms of when you build it out. This is what it's valued as well as all the internal equipment. So 850 million for the out structure, about $500 million for the computer equipment, although the computer equipment is taxed at a higher rate. And this is what you get per data center with all of the equipment inside of it and the structure and on the property of itself per data center. It's about $30 million. If you apply the same math to New Garden Township, it's not nothing, but it's definitely pales in comparison to what it is in another Commonwealth. So it's one where, what does that mean for the township? It's about an additive amount of about 1.6 mils. That's kind of the net valuation to it. For everybody talking about kind of FTE counts and earned income tax, it's kind of a misnomer. There's not a lot of daily jobs associated with data center technicians. So don't kind of be pulled into that discussion as that it's something that is actually providing value. Because also what you have to consider is number one, are those technicians in Pennsylvania, number one, living in your locality, because they have to be residentially based. And that means you get half of it. You don't get the full one, because half of that goes to the schools and the other half goes to the township. And if they're working at a data center and they live in another place that has earned income tax, all of that workforce income tax stays with that township. So you don't get it. So it's not necessarily true when people say the workforce creates income tax for localities. That's actually not the case at all. So now you can correct people when they talk about it. You say you went to the New Garden Township public meeting and learned this information to apply it. And then, of course, in terms of the fact that the highest millage rate in your area is the school district, they would benefit the most, but the most is still less than half of what they get per data center in Loudoun County. So it's still less. You're leaving that much at the table. And then the other one they're talking about in terms of values are more about one-time revenues, permit revenues that would be kind of seen as a windfall moment, but it's not revenue, it's cash. You're getting an impact fee, if you will. As well as there is, I believe, potential legislation to attach quote unquote large impactful developments as an impact fee. It's legislation, it's not into effect, but it's kind of the same thing. It's a one-time non-reoccurring revenue. It's kind of being demonstrated as, oh, you can offset kind of the need to have a fire truck that needs to service the data center. And then you would turn back and say, well, if you didn't build the data center, we wouldn't have to buy a ladder truck in the first place. So thank you for that offsetting cost. And kind of one where the biggest issue right now isn't necessarily wholly the cost of fire and EMS service trucks, it's the fire and EMS service provider. So I always say, don't pay for the fire truck, pay for the ongoing needs for the firefighter, because that's going to help us out more in the long run, because it's sustainable. So what do we need to do today? It's kind of like the $1 million question. So first and foremost, you need to start planning and preparing. That's across the board. Every township needs to be having this exact same discussion. And with that, everybody's trying to do this kind of forensic analysis of who's next. You know, who's going to be kind of the next, you know, quote unquote, unlucky lottery winner where someone's going to submit a land development application and now you're in it. Because once you're in it, there's, you know, you're in the process, you're in the group now. You get to join these lucky municipalities that are currently in the process of doing it today. So right now, the industry has kind of targeted areas along, I believe, the Schuylkill River corridor right now because of its relative proximity to very cheap low-hanging fruits in terms of infrastructure connections. And so that's why it's there today. As of course, those opportunities get more scant. It's not like they're going to go away because the financial incentives are too great. They're just going to do the harder to build projects. So with that, it's not necessarily a great risk, I would say low risk, but it's not going to be low risk forever because the build out happening around you at some point, it's going to have to come somewhat near you. And also to say that there's also proposals for within Delaware as well. So you can have intrastate kind of overlaps for infrastructure as well. So you're not completely immune to it. What all these kind of colored lines are, they represent somewhat high tension power lines under different voltages. So there is one that kind of goes right across the top of New Garden Township. I can't remember the exact voltage of it. I think it's like 250 to 300. It's a lower voltage, but those can be improved upon. And then PICO would be required to pull something down into New Garden Township. So we're not completely off the grid, if you will. So it's not a stretch of the imagination that New Garden could be identified potentially sometime down the road in the future. So with that, you know, with the state kind of enacting legislation, but not really working with municipalities to get them ready, we're kind of in this ramp up moment. What do we need to do to kind of spool up our effort here locally to prepare for something that might happen in our community? And then that is really one where, because of the state's, I'll call it, lack of collaboration early on, the one thing that's happening for them right now is that they're trying to incentivize an industry. It's one where, well, the state doesn't have a say about your, like how you do, like outside of the MPC, that kind of local influence on the conversation. So they're seeking an industry that has to serve, you know, 2,000 plus different townships and boroughs and you know, first and second classes and you know, first and second class, third class cities. So they have a lot of clients to figure out how to, you know, onboard a wide swath of potential industry builders here. So where we are to date in our zoning ordinance, it's one where, well, why didn't this happen earlier in the zoning ordinance? And that's a likely kind of one thing to understand is it was understood that we needed to do something. It was just, they didn't have any guidance to date. So how you are compiling all of the criterion that would go into an ordinance regulation hadn't necessarily been fully delivered by the one agency that you are not necessarily dependent upon, but you would seek information from, which is the Chester County Planning Commission. They partnered into a ordinance guide construct, if you will, with Montgomery County and finally delivered it to townships in April of 26. So as you can see, that was last month. And so it's one where, you know, we have an entire zoning ordinance kind of built for purpose, but no ordinance regulations for data centers. So it's like, do you halt everything else and wait for this? Or do you move forward with the zoning ordinance knowing you immediately need to build out this one specific section of it? So the good news is we're going to do both as a recommendation. So the goal would be to move forward with their zoning ordinance, but through a more nuanced discussion for the MPC, if it's recommended by the board to do so, you can enact what is kind of figuratively called a data center moratorium. You can stop data center applications for the next 180 days to do a curative amendment, which it's by design, it's stated that way, to cure the ordinance, specifically when you target in a resolution to say where we're deficient in the regulatory criterion for a data center. And then you spend the next 6 months correcting it through a more deliberate process, making sure that it's more public awareness and more community inputs. And then at the end, you would just add that as a added component to your ordinance at a later date. So you're not kind of, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. So this would be, if the board wants to do it in that manner, this would be the recommendation that offsets any risk for anything happening in the near term. Like I said, it's low risk. And right now, as I understand, Not a lot of townships or localities in this area have done a curative amendment. They're just building it kind of on the fly. Now, in terms of an artificial sense of pace to get it done, that remains to be seen. So with that, that's all I had to plan for to talk about tonight. I didn't want to kind of do the full Pandora's box and going down the road of every single impacted data center community, because there's a lot of publications as well as news articles about it. So I think people probably understand what it means. But just wanted to get a sense of direction from the board about how to go through this process as a community. What do you want us to do? And I'll leave it off from there.
Okay, so first of all, in the new zoning, it's permitted in the enterprise district.
It was whittled down to being a conditional use as the most stringent usage of it in the enterprise district, which essentially is the industrial zone along the Penn Green corridor.
So, excuse me.
And don't get me wrong, most municipalities around here aren't in a position to just focus on the regulations. They're also having to already do what we did, which is identify the zoning district and where that's going to be through all the zoning as well as the use. So at least our zoning discussions have already talked about where to put it. Because right now, some of the people don't even have that in guard.
So it's like a little bit funny because that's the area with high hydrogen sulfide, which is
Yeah.
probably not good for a data center. But also, what if they, what if they sold it? What if they sold it? Like, what if they bought up all of those farms? Right, it's right
Yeah,
here.
they can.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I think that this needs to get revised
What do you mean?
to areas with smaller tracks.
They are pretty small. There's only a few.
But that's not small.
So where would you have in mind that has small track?
I don't know. I need to look at the map.
Because all the rest of them have residential uses and everything. This was the less residential use. The reason for it was putting in an area with the least amount of
But
residential.
also the most probable.
So the point of the curative amendment is to say we put a moratorium on data centers for the 6-month period of time till we fix the ordinance.
Right.
And that could include a change of that. I mean, it could include location.
Location change.
I think more that if we put restrictions on it, just period, would be more beneficial to people than just trying to put it somewhere else. That's just my thought, because they have so much money. Chris was saying, that they're buying out $1 million houses
the-
and telling them to
the
get
Prince
lost,
William
so,
Gateway was a clustering of 100 landowners on small tracts. So there's no way to say, oh, if we make this highly parcelized that they won't figure out a way because of the money behind it. If they're willing to buy $1 million homes at $4 million a pop just for the purpose of bulldozing the properties, I think we have an understanding of the amount of equity at play here. There's
Is this
no
gonna
written
end up
strategy
like
to do.
acre where we are we allowed to, with what authority will we
I mean,
have?
now that you mention it, probably if the municipality is bound together and get too obnoxious about it, they probably will just run to the state and the state will just override us.
Mm-hmm.
So,
They'll give 'em
We
tax
have to
break and-
provide for every legitimate use, so it's a legitimate use.
Yep.
And if we make it so that no parcel can be bigger than an acre, so they can't build one, that's called de facto exclusionary zoning, so that we just need to work on it to make sure we control.
So
That's the purpose of the curative amendment.
would your recommendation be to do the curative amendment for a 6-month period?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
would we be able to do it within the 6-month period? I think so, Chris, right?
So what that would entail is the
Both?
The
Even-
first step is the enactment of a resolution. You could do that concurrently. So you would say, yes, we're adopting the zoning ordinance, and then the resolution behind it is to enact a curative amendment with all the reasons specifically targeting about data center uses, and that starts your clock. So with that, you need to afford for the full 6 months to capture not just doing deliberations, but the process to adopt. So it has to go through the review and adoption hearing dates as well, because 6 months is a stopping point for not just the conversation about the full enactment. So I would say you probably have to make hay about a 4-month deliberate window to start having meetings about talking about regulation requirements. And you're not starting from scratch now because you do have a pretty significant ordinance guide model from the county, as well as now based off of the fact that multiple townships are kind of quote unquote going through it a little bit. You have kind of some test cases out there that you can look and provide for, maybe some gleaning of some of the regulatory requirements
Yep.
from that. And it's just kind of like a way to kind of build out the picture for what you're looking for to enact locally.
I mean, I think it would be helpful for us to kind of give it a little bit more time to see how these data centers react to these kind of first bloody noses that they seem to be getting of other municipalities reacting to that, and if they just go away or if they come back with more weapons and more.
It doesn't
things.
hurt to do it.
Right.
That's
Like-
kind of the thing. So it never hurts just to have it in place. But kind of the ostrich with the head in the sand is not really a posture that I would recommend.
Yeah,
You have to have
I agree.
something.
I think that runway would be longer than,
I think I made the
6
joke
months.
earlier. It's not like you was a Beetlejuice. If you say it 3 times out loud, then you get it. It's like you have no decision-making authority. Somebody can get together with property owners and basically compartmentalize and submit an application to do a re-subdivision and consolidation to do it, so. And that's everywhere.
Yep.
And like I said, as long as the financials make sense for them to do so, they'll shoehorn it anywhere.
here's a question.
If you have a public comment, you need to come up to the microphone, please. Thank you. It's on, and just name and address for the.
Just went from one big dynamic to a hurricane punch, you know, it's incredible.
Just real quick, name and address for the.
Yeah, Mark Ridinger, 210 Sunnydale Road.
Thank you very much.
I just want to know, these guys cannot operate just without some tangential body, whether it's the Commerce Department or someone in government. They have to answer to somebody. I know these are all millionaire tech guys, but they're going to be out of here soon. You know, the country's going to be changing, I hope. And people are going to be sitting around with these big buildings in their backyard. And then what do you do with these big buildings? You're going to build malls, you know, malls are really in fashion now, you know?
I
So,
just think, like, to your point, though, what we've all witnessed with like Acre is if the state wants to force something on the municipalities, they easily can. And the
Supersedes.
thought that there is going to be governance over this is
so Pennsylvania has oversight in this?
So they could
They-
supersede our ordinance.
right.
But who's Pennsylvania, the little buddy in the background?
Ask all the people who are huffing the hydrogen sulfide every day.
Okay.
So,
I like
I'm
the
the
idea of
eyes.
being peremptorily or just, you know,
Right.
early on in the game, let's start. Because this is going to get nasty. It is really going to get nasty. And we got a nice, beautiful school here. It's a beautiful
Right.
community. Where are they going to get the water?
And the power.
What's that?
And the power.
And the town?
Power.
Power.
And-
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
So right now you have Upper Marion, Limerick, they all have applications. They're close to the nuclear plant in Limerick, and they have the Schuylkill River for a discharge, right? And there's one other at the Delaware River, North Berks County,
Yeah, Bucks.
Bucks County.
Well, I like to hear the voices up here know, you know, this is something that we just can't just all, you know, fall down and say, well, that's just the way it is.
so
This is our home, you know, we ought to be able to do something and, you know, at least fight a little bit, you know?
yeah.
So I
would
will-
like to state for the record, I do not support data centers. Before the Facebook mafia comes after me, I'm totally, really
To
just,
track it along, there are, and I've tried to look at because they're to give you a sense of how organized it is at the state, just look at all the potential proposed legislations kind of for or against, kind of currently flurrying into the House and Senate floors right now. There is no sense of direction. I don't think anybody realized how successful their tax incentive would be in terms of this flood of intention from the industry. And don't get me wrong, this isn't just Pennsylvania and Virginia, it's across the nation.
I know.
And it's one where right now, there is at least a structured argument about kind of housing the governance at the DCED level, and whether or not that would be a model ordinance that would supersede your local ordinance as well to kind of standardize how industry deals with townships. That's a thing. And so to that end, I would encourage everybody to reach out to their local legislators. I believe it's House Bill 2151 or something like that. You can look it up. I know there's also a Senate bill, very similarly scoped, but different. I cannot remember the name of it off the top of my head, but both are kind of being bandied around. And that's kind of your ability to kind of escalate your voice up as a resident to get more information and understand what's being discussed about, because it's very tough to follow the flow of all of the bills being proposed consistently for anything, let alone one kind of use out of the pile of noise that's constantly going on.
And just a reminder, like Pennsylvania as a whole is not like New Garden. It's mostly the opposite,
And
right? Like just
the other part is there's
Yeah.
no unified understanding of how the puck will oversee the utility influx right now as well. So it's even more kind of illustrating of the lack of sense of standardization at that level. But right now, the presence is here. So they're literally building the ship as it's at sea.
Well, I know up in Oxford, there's, well, I think it's out in Nottingham where the Hearst plant is. There's one going in.
So
There's talk.
I would
and
be
that's close to
very-
Peach Bottom
Yeah.
for the power.
Yeah.
So
And the
we're not
people are
off
furious.
grid.
Yeah.
We're not.
because there is another body of water to the
Oh,
west of
yeah.
us, I would be actually very concerned more so for the kind of eastern central Lancaster County as well as western southern Chester County out near Oxford and the Nottingham, because of the things you're talking about. Relatively easy flat land, it's easy to guide infrastructure over flat territories, and they're not too far away from some of these larger, because this highest tension power line kind of goes further west of here. So you could see something pop up there very realistically. Hopefully they're having the same conversation.
Thank you.
Take heart in the fact that a stiff wind will knock out our power, so. Enjoy the blackouts the next time they come through. Don't curse them. Be like, oh, thank God, no power.
And that's also to say that they can exist with now newer technology calls for modular power generation, independent of light pole structures and things of that nature. So where there is a will, there is a way, is kind of what I'm talking to.
Don Morgan, Hartfeld. I would tell you, I spent my career providing equipment to those data centers, communication equipment. And to give you an idea, in the 90s, we went from an average commitment to 500 ports to 28,000. And if you think I was in a data center in northern Jersey about 4 years ago, and one of the things they bragged about was the fact they're near two power sources, two power companies. That's right where we are, Delmarva and Pico. So it wouldn't be far-fetched for someone to see the advantage of finding a location close to those two power sources. That saves them from running the huge diesel engines that choke everybody.
take your poison.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another one
Well, the
too
hydrogen
is
sulfide would hinder.
while you might not necessarily be the epicenter for the actual center, I don't know if I've seen kind of lately some of the facilities associated with the kind of, was it 750 kV high tension power lines, but they need to run that conduit through something. And so you might have between residential spaces, a high tension power line kind of lateral, if you will, as well. So there is secondary impacts as well to consider.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rob Rosales. I'm at 21 Pelham Drive, right here in Landenberg, Hunt. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate everybody's time. So Chris, actually, I didn't know you from Northern Virginia. One of my biggest customers is Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, and I work with Prince William quite a bit. I know Prince William recently halted I think it was Gateway Industries that was going to put a data center, and they halted all that. So you did a great job explaining the impacts that it has on the community and the fact that, you know, the water consumption, the electricity that goes up. I mean, we're going to be paying for those infrastructures. And I know there was, you know, that whole case, you know, where they said, no, we won't. But the reality is we will in the end, because they can bill us for it. They're going to do so. In addition to that, excuse me, got a little bit of a cold, so I apologize. So in addition to that, the other thing I want to make sure that we're doing is that I know we're kind of discussing, there's kind of twofold here. We want to make sure there's something in place because to your point, Stephen, the state supersedes any ordinance that, you know, we can provide here. However, if we have a common ground, especially with other localities in the area and we're all on the same page, perhaps we could come together to fight that if that ever comes to fruition. But we got to make sure that that happens because if we don't have it in place, you know, being from protecting the community, we're trying to protect, we're already fighting the hydrogen sulfide issue going on. Now we're talking about, you know, these data centers, to your point, they're not going to sustain all that power from that power grids. They're going to use diesel engines. All that toxic emission is going to be going to the air. We need to protect the community as a whole. So I really hope, and I guess my ask to you is, are you guys looking to, what are your steps, I guess, that we're kind of decide here to protect us from that and ensuring that we're in commune with the localities and the other municipalities in the areas to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I think the steps we're going to take are to be doing the, what's it called, retrocision or?
But yeah, you
yeah.
would basically go through all of the identifications of the, you know, the things that inform the regulatory criterion for a data center. So you would talk about energy consumption, energy use, energy facilities. Does your ordinance dictate that power consumption down to what level? What are allowable versus non-allowable infrastructure to build that capacity? And then you have to cite for the, you know, the natural resource impacts caveats to be able to say, yeah, I have a justifiable means to combat that in an ordinance. And that also depends upon what those existing higher level statutes are, because then you also default on the fact that while you want all of these things in your shopping cart, are you the authority that can enforce against those items in the shopping cart? So it's a blend of everything, but it would be identified of what areas that we want to build out and make them more uniquely configured to make sure they're protecting us. And that's, right now, it's in the data center ordinance guide in terms of items for consideration. It's on the Chester County Public website, so you can go on the Chester County Planning Commission and go through that yourself if you wanted to look at it. And then over the course of the next several months, what we'll do with staff is kind of figure out with the board as well, like what level of like community input sessions and just discussions items to have for that. Kind of what we did the zoning ordinance. It's a bit of an extra effort, but we'll do this kind of as a need to implement something that would be beneficial for the community as an ordinance to
Got
have.
it. Okay. And then with the curative plan that you were talking about, is that something where now that 6-month period is our time to be able to discuss, to your point, why we can't sustain such a data center or whatever the case might be, to and fro?
No, what, that gives us 6 months that we put a hold on any application.
Yeah.
And we revise. So it's a moratorium on data centers. That would be the purpose. And during that 6-month period of time, we revise the ordinance in a way that is appropriate.
Understood. Okay.
So we can't, a legitimate business cannot be zoned out totally. You can't say no data centers in New Garden. What we can do is do the very best that we can to control their construction and operation.
And that's what the construct of the MPC is. We have to afford for the use. So
Yes.
let's put it in our terms in the most amenable way possible for the township to say that this is as hyper restrictive as we can possibly make it.
Understood. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Chris, for our conservation easement, do they have, obviously you can't develop it, right? So that would put a stop to it. There's
Ones
no-
that the township has, that's one thing. If it's a private easement, that's under a different discussion, because when the land use transfers over from one property owner to the other, I don't know what that means in terms of like that kind of like a buyout clause, if you will. Winnie would probably have a
Yeah,
better.
if it's a perpetual easement that runs with the land, it's perpetual.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah,
And
so
whether it's
we
agriculture or
require, like open
conservation.
space funds, yeah.
I would say it depends.
Okay.
Yes.
Dennis R. I live at 144 Cooper's Hawk Lane, Annenberg, Pennsylvania. A few things that I wanted to bring up that I'm concerned about regarding the data center is just basically the water. The amount of water it's going to use is extremely concerning. Some data centers use anywhere between 1 to 5 million gallons of water in a day to cool machinery. Most of the residents around here operate out of the same aquifer, and a lot of people still have just regular drilled wells on their property. So that's a big concern for me. The other thing is I did do some research as somebody who has spent 15 years in an attorney's office. I wanted to bring up the fact that we are unique because we do have our own Pennsylvania Constitution. And in Article 1 specifically, Section 27, which hopefully can be put on the record here. It basically tells us that public natural resources are the Commonwealth property of all people. It explains that it is also including future generations. So basically, public natural resources do not belong to the state of Pennsylvania to just give them away. They actually belong to the people and the children of future generations of those. It basically states that the Commonwealth acts as a trustee with a fiduciary duty to conserve these resources for the people, of this state. I think as a New Garden Township, that gives us a decent legal stance against any data centers that would be proposing to build here. I would like to see a motion to completely ban any kind of data center.
Did you hear what I said? We can't do that. We cannot ban a use totally. A legitimate use can't be banned.
Okay.
And it really wouldn't be constructed on public lands dedicated to open space,
The resources, though.
The resources, the
resources belong
belonging to water.
the
Yeah, no,
people.
yeah.
And so as employees of the state, as employees of the state, you're a caretaker of those resources, but your job is to preserve them for the people that they belong to,
Mhm.
generations of those people.
So let me just back up 20 years. Stop artesian. There's currently hundreds of thousands of gallons of water daily being shipped to Delaware. So the Commonwealth is protecting it under that act you cited by monitoring. End of my discussion. It
But-
doesn't always work the way that we interpret it or maybe the way that it should work.
I mean, more than that, it also says about like clean air and
Correct.
and water, and we are not able to do anything about it. And we're experiencing that every day. So like we can't even like lean on that or depend
Yeah.
on that for.
It
It has to be enforced by somebody, and if it's enforced by the state who is in support of this, then you're not gonna have any. I would also be interested in knowing how many EMFs this thing puts off.
who knows?
And what kind of radiation the residents are being exposed to, livestock is being exposed to as far as, I mean, we've all been to plenty of doctor's appointments, and we all know that they don't like to continuously x-ray us for purposes of destroying our cells in our bodies. It's very harmful.
I would just say we have one thing, as Chris has pointed out, truly in our favor, and that's our geography.
Yeah.
If they were going to site a data center that requires 10 acres, they want flat level land. We got geography here, a lot of hills and valleys, does not make it very amenable to building data centers.
Yeah.
And forget about the water thing because they can build them and operate them without any water. So that's not going to keep anybody away.
Right.
The other thing would be closeness to power transmission lines.
Mhm.
So, but as
I'm
Chris
just,
said,
I'm just
we're at a very
expressing.
low risk here, which is good, but that's not to say we should get back on our heels. But one of the great things we have going for us is our geography and all the hills and valleys. If I was going to build a data center, this would not be anywhere near the top
I
of the
would-
list.
I would say our stormwater MS4 permit begs to differ, but that's a different
Yeah.
enterprise. in
The,
and of
the
itself.
other thing with zoning, and a lot of it is foreign language, but we have it mapped in an area where it's not high density. So we're allowing that use there because the population, now the motoring public will go through there daily, but it's not in a high dense area.
Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, those were just a few of my concerns. I think, as these kinds of, meetings proceed and we get further into data discussion, I would expect there to, continuously be a growth in the local community, against this. So, you know, as it continues to be an objective, there's going to be a lot of pushback as we move forward.
Correct, and that's why the ordinance is more of a talk about regulations more than support or against it. It's not necessarily that. This is just getting the inputs of all of an ordinance together. And you can be as softly discussing that, and I've seen some that basically just motion for allowing their solicitor to start putting an ordinance together versus some are being more like community-based. We had our survey last year that was talking about wanting to have more community inputs on decision-making, and this would be a function of us meeting that demand on their terms. So we're going through a more deliberate, overt process, and trust me, it's not easy to do as staff to kind of
Right.
take that in and stuff, but we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do it in parallel and in the open.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Chris, moving on,
No vote or anything else
No
tonight. It's
vote.
just at the June meeting, the goal is to prepare that kind of targeted curative amendment resolution then that would be adopted in sequence with obviously you still have the deliberation period for the final zoning ordinance, which then starts your 180-day counter on the June 15th date. So that's kind of the next step. So with that, it would be more of a, is that the process you want to proceed for? And that gives us guidance as staff to prepare for the next meeting. So that's not a vote. It's just, yes, that makes sense or not. Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
Thank you.
Nope. Thank you very much.
next, Chris, we have the commercial vehicle restriction ordinance.
Yes.
Leave this to you, Winnie.
Yeah, the ordinance was advertised on May 6, 2026 in the Daily Local News. The terms of the ordinance amends an existing provision for the streets at issue in that ordinance, which limited any operator to drive any motor vehicle that was a Class B. And that actually was a license for the operator and therefore the truck. So that is now gone, and what has replaced it, or the new provisions of the amendment to the ordinance, are that vehicles are restricted in the form of a truck with a trailer over 45 feet in length on any of the following streets: Scarlet between West South Street and Hillendale, Chambers Road between the railroad crossing and Hillendale, Hillendale Road between Newark Road and Kennett Township line, Thompson Road between Baltimore Pike and Hillendale Road, and New Garden Road its full length. Subsection 1B makes it unlawful to drive any motor vehicle with a weight of over 26,000 pounds gross on any of the following streets: New Garden Road from Route 41 and Newark Road and Bucktoe Road. That's kind of a
Mhm.
interesting intersection there. Scarlet Road south of West South Street to Hillendale Road, and Thompson Road from Baltimore Pike to Hillendale Road. The ordinance establishes those weight limits on the roads as identified, and it's effective immediately upon being adopted by tonight. There are severability and repealer sections in the ordinance, which just says if there's any point of it, any part of it that's not legal, that the rest of it stands. I'd just be looking for a motion to approve it.
Question real quick.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play your traffic cop. So my truck's 42 feet and empty, it weighs 15,000. I'm okay.
Yes.
Good. But loaded, I'm not.
Not if it's over the weight. No,
If it's over
over
26,000.
the 26,000.
Correct.
Great. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 2026-0001?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Great. Copper Leaf Ridge escrow release number 10. Robert, are you going to take that one? Or Chris?
So the attached engineer report called for about a 65K reduction. I'd have to go back into it and remind myself off the top of the head for the, excuse me, Pannoni reviewed completion of the work. So this is number 10 in a series of, I don't know how many it's going to take to get the full reduction. By all accounts, land development is going pretty smoothly out at the Bancroft Ridge, Rouse Chamberlain project site. And so let me pull up the, it's very fuzzy. So yeah, in the paragraph just below, the financial reductions included in the release are obviously mobilization, which is kind of synonymous for all of them, erosion control, roadway and earthwork, storm sewer construction, curbing, paving roads, parking stalls, as well as the widening and any contingency as well. And having had our staff go out there and review, as well as Pannoni, that has been confirmed. So that's why we're releasing it today.
Okay, so based on the Pannoni report, I'll make a motion that we give the release in the amount of $65,045.13, and that would leave a balance just shy of 400,000.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Next, we've got the cell tower lease amendment. Chris?
So if you remember last month, we had the cell tower proposal that was approved by the board for the lease amendment agreement for the airport facility. This was that, in that same discussion for the other sites. This is the second one of the 4 total sites that's here at the actual Public Works and Regional Police Building and Park entranceway. That was one where there was several proposed options in terms of quote unquote them buying out of their lease agreement. And for the reasons discussed during last meeting, it was one where it's beneficial to both to the township and to the provider for doing so. The need was kind of scaling some kind of non-traditional means for revenues to support parks projects and could be, itemized for our capital plan for those this upcoming summer when we put together our budget. But it also helps us to have a sizable reserve position for grant matches. So it's not saying we're just building this cash to be able to spend it on parks. It's building the cash so we can then have a better process for how do we attach for grants, as well as just pay for items that we need to when we need to do them. So the presentation for that is actually in the agenda. I can't remember if I gave it or not last month or not, because it's been a busy few weeks, but this is one where tonight you just have to basically approve the letter of interest. It's non-binding. It would go back to them and they would then pull back together a lease of my agreement similar to the one done last month. This just continues the process for considering that option. And the reason we did option 3 was because it provides for upfront cash as well as gives us a 10-year revenue stream that's offset some of the revenue loss for the 2 towers for the next 10 years. So any questions?
I'll make a motion that we proceed, not adopt, but proceed the discussion with American Tower for the cell phone tower that's behind the police department, 8934 Gap, Newport Pike.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Next, we've got the zoning and parking review for 112 Reese Street.
Robert, you got
Thank
this?
you, Robert.
Just one side note real quick on that, escrow release. That project has really been going, I think a couple of you might have gone up there, but they've done a real good job and have been really good to work with. So, but anyhow, for this, staff recommendation is for the, 112 Reese Street, zoning and parking review. So as you can see, in the R3 zoning district, it's a use by right in our determination. It's a nonprofit organization. They just want to have the field for practice, play. So we felt that it was, met the use by right. Then you can see the definitions for temporary use, and then there's commercial recreational use, which I don't really know that they completely apply. And then the setbacks are on the review letter. The one thing that came into question from zoning perspective or from a land development was the parking. And there's not the ordinance does not specify that use. So it's under the use, it's one parking space per employee. Well, it's a nonprofit thing, so really, I don't even know if they have any employees. But in that, for any use that's not identified, the ordinance says that the Board of Supervisors can grant the a decision. So the two questions before you are, first, do you agree with the zoning determination that it is a nonprofit organization using the field, the property? There's not going to be any activity after dark till dawn, so there's no lighting issues. And then the other is just the parking. And the gentleman who was the applicant, I thought he was going to be here tonight if you had any questions for him, but he didn't show up. I don't know whether it was he was mixed up on the time or what.
He was stranded in Washington, D.C. with a flat tire.
Oh,
So he
that
reached out
explains
to
it.
us and let us know, apologize that he couldn't be here. To provide some summary details, so the person or entity that bought this Reese Street property is Tough Ken LLC. It's represented by a company called Square Roots Collective. If you're not familiar with Square Roots Collective, they're the philanthropical moment arm of Chatham Financial that currently does a lot of project work over in Kennett Square. So they bought this property as a means for providing for community impact in the region. As a temporary use, they saw that the 2.5-acre lot fits a purpose for doing a temporary like soccer function. It's mostly for, I think it's like league scouting types of purposes, really. So it's not necessarily going to be like a league build out for many games over a long period of time. But they also have other future plans in terms of some of the Tough Kenneman revitalization efforts that we have in our planning doctrine as well. So this is one where in the means for the near term, it would be proposed for a temporary soccer use with a parking on grass facility there to provide some more kind of ability to understand the request.
And in their the applicant expects no more than 10 vehicles.
So question on that, do they have legal access to the private road?
That I don't know.
So that would be a question that
For that, what it's that church, what's it,
it's a private road that cuts.
it's all the way through to New.
So the
Newark.
non-labeled road is the non-Church Street side. The parking is off of Reese Street. though.
Parking's off of Reese Street.
So they would not be parking or using the private road.
No.
And we can direct them not to, and they would have to have on-site management to make sure that people are parking off of Reese
Yeah,
Street.
the parking.
Right.
And the field is actually.
So they should, they should have access to the private road, which is up here. However, that is going to annoy the neighbors because I read their little signs every day. Private road, private road, private road.
Right, but the parking's gonna come in off of Reese Street.
Okay, I would be fine with the waiver then. And this is temporary. Define temporary.
Well,
Is it-
6 months is a zoning, is a zoning
6
permit
months.
for temporary. We can do that and revisit it in 6 months.
Or do they have a time frame that they're interested in and we could just sunset it in a year or year and a half or whatever? I mean,
I
leave
I
that
would
up to you.
almost, I think I would almost rather do it as a zoning permit where we're revisiting it every 6 months so it doesn't get lost.
Okay, I'm good. And no lights.
Yeah, no lights, and that would be in the zoning permit.
It's a beautiful place for a soccer field. It really is.
So is the 10 parking spots the maximum? Is it flexible? What?
Utilize the on-street parking, not the private road.
Yeah,
You need to go down and police if it's 12 cars instead of 10. I don't think so.
yeah. It's good enough direction for me.
If everyone's okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, as much as they can squeeze into the 150 feet by 135 feet. it's fine.
And think of this as like an overflow need. We have had a conversation with our parks and open space staff in terms of using some of the fields up here for other types of games and events. Like I said, this is more for scouting and kind of practice for the one team that has a kind of more focused of a talent scouting kind of function to it. So people regionally come here to play. That's why it's not like more than 10 spots.
Yeah.
This is a more of a boutique type function for it.
They would need a driveway permit from Kenny.
I'm sorry, what's that?
They would need a driveway permit from Kenny because currently there's no curb cut on Reese Street
Okay.
for that. So they should at least have direction of what we would.
If they're planning to use it for parking, it would be a
So we
driveway
don't
permit.
bust the edge of Reese Street up since we just paved it.
Okay. Very good.
Good. Is there a motion to approve the temporary use of 112 Reese Street as Robert described?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? Great. Thank you, Robert. Next, we've got the Chester County tax claim waiver in the amount of $427.54.
So I know the financials to this are staggering. It's by definition something that can only be approved by the Board of Supervisors to waive.
Yep.
This was a request coming from the Chester County. Do I need to explain this much more? It's basically these properties don't exist anymore. The modular homes were removed. They're no longer in collection status and they weren't collecting on the delinquencies. So they're requesting they be waived to move them from the record and we don't have to expend resources, or they don't have to expend resources following up on it.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. And last item on the agenda is,
Well, there is
Right.
a manager's report for tonight.
oh, okay.
that.
Great.
Sorry.
So sorry. Think I was gonna be the last thing, sorry, but we're close.
Thanks for.
Good
hanging out.
evening, everyone. So back in October 25, I was given permission to move forward with the Limestone Road Sight Lines Improvement Project to improve the exit and kind of entrance safety, New Garden Hills. The project began in spring just because of weather. It wrapped up in late March. And it was reviewed by the township engineer. They checked all the boxes on it. So I'm here to ask you for permission to allow Chris to approve payment 1 in the amount of $108,112.50 to G&B Construction. Again, this is part of the overall cost of $176,000. So initially, that full amount will be billed to the Open Space Fund, with a grant offsetting that cost. We were able to reassign, do a scope change on existing grant that we weren't able to use at New Garden Hills, the amount of $100,000. So all in, the project's going to cost just over $67,000. But right now, we're just asking for payment 1 to be released in that $108,000 amount.
Yeah, looks great. Motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank
Great.
you very much.
Thank you. Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for hanging out with us, man.
And then lastly, we've got the manager's report, 2020, fiscal 2027 budget priorities.
So I will try to get through this as expeditiously as possible. As everybody loves to talk about budgeting more than
We do
than
not
me.
believe you.
Always be budgeting. That's my Glenn Ross. Um, so, part of tonight is kind of that continuation for what we try to do as a board to talk about. Let me make sure this isn't. Every year as we proceed into the summer time frame, and not saying you have to have all of your nuances provided for tonight, but just get in the mindset of, okay, year over year, we've been approving these budgets with these kind of identified areas to make sure that they're incorporated based off of the alignment with the comp plan, alignment with our annual priorities, community inputs, you name it, just to make sure when we put together our plans midsummer that it's coming out to you as, yes, this plan makes sense based off of what we just talked about. So this is just a high-level summary for the budget planning process. Of course, we do this throughout the late summer, early fall, in terms of public meetings to review it. But of course, the motions start earlier than that, and kind of a precursor to that is tonight as well. So the budget priorities kind of make up the details that are afforded for when we talk about the annual state of the township. That's usually done in August. And historically, over the last 3 years of planning, we've tried to align comp plan priorities with what we talk about as, well, board priorities as well, and align those to show that the funding level is one where we can kind of shift funding or priorities somehow within the general fund, capital funds, to some of our enterprise funds as well, to make sure that we're addressing everything as maximum as possible, to make sure that we're being as good stewards with our revenues here, our tax dollars. So this is what was discussed last year. If anybody's interested in these, you can go into these very long, arduous State of the Township and budget dialogues that are all saved and posted on YouTube. If you have absolutely no time or anything better to do, to go through all those. But the reasons these were prioritized were just based off of the more exigent priorities identified by the board, and aligning those with those comprehensive plan kind of priorities as well, to show that our near-term priorities still align with our long-term priorities. So in 26, these, of course, were identified from last summer going into the final budgeting process in terms of how those priorities kind of influence ongoing things that we're doing throughout the year. I always like to say it all starts with strong financial management. You can't make decisions on pursuing local actions if you don't have money, and making sure that you're planning for that in a well-executed manner helps, so that you can be as flexible as possible. So making sure that it's always kind of omnipresent in our dialogue. Economic development, we're doing it currently right now with our zoning. We're finalizing that roughly in June, of course, continuing it with the construct of data centers, but it's to say that we're basically being as intentional as possible to get these projects up and off the ground. The biggest one from 26 going into 27 was getting that kinetic element to the White Clay Point property, as it was identified as an area of interest for development in the comprehensive plan. Going forward for number 3, it was infrastructure, of course, making sure that we're not necessarily just paving roads, but getting correct amount of transportation planning, long-term inputs as well. And of course, some of these have already kind of taken place with the White Clay conversations, as well as the ongoing discussions for the 41 corridor as a whole. Stormwater as well, in terms of making sure that we're partnering as much as possible with our local kind of resource providers on the red clay and the white clay respectively. And also we finalized our implementation of our mile-long tract of stormwater improvements as well up at the golf course. So we're meeting our needs there. And of course, we're planning for the next round of needs, because that will likely be soon to follow. Addressing public safety services, as those who are not aware, the Avondale West Grove Fire Department merger discussion is ongoing. That was based off of kinetic discussions between the municipalities and the stations. So they're in the plans in terms of right now of finalizing their consolidation plan, and the governance dialogue with the participating municipalities is following it right now, which should have a more robust update in terms of proposed governance models at the next few meetings here. And of course, with the regional police, it's always been discussion about making sure we can find more continued regional partners, and that's always been part of the dialogue. A quick overview on enhancement of services is about not only how do we build out more programs in terms of our parks and recreation function, and enhancing our park services as well, specific out of New Garden Park, long-term out of the Smedley Preserve former golf course park area, as well as out of New Garden Hills, former St. Anthony's in the Hills. As well as just, are we kind of continually improving our internal processes through the onboarding of new technology, make us more efficient, kind of as a small organization that helps us kind of offset the cumbersome amounts of labor required to process things. So just making sure that we're choosing tech solutions that make financial sense as well as operational sense. Maintaining our open space program, not only implementing the master plans that we have identified for open space properties, but also continuing to engage at the Open Space Review Board level, identifying properties for continued preservations. And I believe that's also still occurring right now for an additive tract here sometime in the future. And then last but not least, the kind of discussion around continuation to improve the airport master plan at New Garden Flying Field and the implementation of aviation facilities there, as well as the decision, I believe, a few months ago to try to seek designation for an airport land development zone status to serve as a workforce tax incentive tool to seek solicitations for businesses that want to locate by our airfield as part of an economic development program. And then just continuing to find ways that we can improve energy efficiency, mostly through our township facilities as well. Those are all identified for 26. So how about 27? You know, are these still the continued pursuits? Is there anything else, excuse me, to think of? I wanted to talk about a few things in terms of potential impacts on the budget planning process and whether or not they will or will not impact our financial position in terms of operating revenues or expenditures for that matter. So just know that the Avondale-West Grove merger does carry some level of potential budget impact. The way it is today, you know, we are a certain municipal funder for the Avondale Fire Company side. When you pull in West Grove and all of those West Grove participating municipalities, it's no longer just New Garden and Avondale. It's New Garden, Avondale, and 8 other municipalities. So that wholesaling function and what represents New Garden's kind of quote unquote percentage impact, that will be lesser than it is today. So we're going to get some level of a wholesale value add for that. So what that means, it depends upon what we're contributing today, what that means for contributing in dollars tomorrow, as well as the year-over-year changes from the fire company's contribution request. But in that net, it's likely to decrease because of our percentage as a impact within that model. There's also proposed legislation. We try to constantly monitor what's going through the House right now. This one was picked up through our Pennsylvania Municipal League partners. There is energy around updating the local enabling tax. This is Act 511. It's part of your economic income taxes, if you will. So this one is the local services tax. Think of it as I am a worker working in this municipality, so I pay $52 a year. So it's kind of like a payroll tax, if you will. This was written in a recent time. It was 1965. So that's why they came up with that number long ago. So they're finally updating it now, you know, several, you know, almost 80 years later, or excuse me, 60 years later. But with that, that number increases with the township's current level to the future level. So if that goes into effect, we have the option to basically add revenue just by updating our own tax ordinance component for that as well. And that's a big significant lift to the township because right now, as you remember, you know, the future capital outlay increase to continue doing what we're doing for infrastructure requires a bit of a $500,000 jump to make sure that we're able to sustain that and replace the revenues that we've used. So that would be a natural fill for that gap. So now that you filled that gap, anything that's coming through for the potential future White Clay development is all just additive revenue. It's not earmarked for anything. So that's kind of a helpful thing to think about in terms of just bandwidth management in terms of revenues and expenditures. And then another one, I know everyone loves paying the hydrant tax. It's been into effect for a similar amount of time. In fact, I don't think it's 1965. I think it's actually in the 50s, if I can cite that correctly. But with that is today, the amount of phone calls that we get about people yelling about this tax, as well as the management from Keystone Collections in terms of the billing component to it, which creates more calls. It's a tax that most people forget to pay in the first place. So then we have the liens that cost more to remove the liens in terms of headspace management to do so. So needless to say, at the end of the day, the reason this tax exists is we thought that sometime very long ago as a township that it meant something to live within 780 feet of a fire hydrant, and that helped us pay the water bill. That's all it was for. So right now our water bill equates to about $108K for 2,700 out of total. I believe it's, I have this in here, 4189 parcels. So about 65% of the township is quote unquote within the eligible zone of 780 feet. However, if I live in 790 feet or 1,200 feet, It doesn't mean that they can't daisy chain some pumper trucks to a fire hydrant nearby and I'm still getting that water in the first place. So by definition today, it's a non-equitable tax for the township. So with that,
Tell you, I gotta interrupt you. I got a bill for $180.
oh, we've had a huge issue with our biller.
17.
Yeah.
I own property,
Correct.
just came the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard
There's-
concerns from residents. And not to, yeah, I've heard the exact same concerns from residents who got that. And not to impugn Keystone's credibility or integrity, but I find it interesting that I got a bill from them for $35 telling me to pay it in 3 weeks. Otherwise, they're going to tack on a $35 fee
Correct.
that they get to keep. So I'm not saying they have an incentive to
Well,
drag their feet.
there is a process to that as well. If you have and just kind of put, this is just more of a demonstration that it is a nuanced tax bill separate from your normal tax bill that comes in differing periods based off of your billing provider's capabilities, of which if there is a delinquency attached to that you have to also get assessed for, the only person who can waive that delinquency is the township. So you're just creating more headache for us to go through potentially 2,700 bills that we outsourced in the first place. They come back to us to go through everything and say, that one's legitimate, that one's not. And in this case, the bill you're talking about was a billing error. We're already working significant amount of headspace and hours, sorry, Christina, to get those corrected in the first place. So they're errant bills. So it's just
I just paid-
part of it.
I just paid them.
So is there a better way to pay our water bill is essentially what I'm postulating here. And so based off of some of the revenue impacts, there might be a way that we could, as a township, absorb the cost through other revenues being provided to get it done with this hydrant tax. So there's a potential there. It could be up for consideration and discussion during the summer. And I just wanted to put it on your radar for consideration. Also, in terms of what does it mean to repeal a tax? That's more of a solicitor question in the process to go through with that. 65%. I know there's a 70% magical threshold in terms of it's enough coverage. We will be there based off of when these next land developments get input anyway. So it's a matter of time. Can we just get out in front of it and just do something different? I can't tell you how many times there's been a last second lien on a property sale that somebody comes running in on a Friday afternoon at 3:45 in the afternoon saying, I need this done today. It's like, thanks. So it's more of a headache than what it's worth. And there's another way that we can figure it. Plus our millage rate today, it's adding to a surplus. So we have a nearly $500,000 fund balance to basically pay for a fire hydrant that only costs $2,000 per fire hydrant. So we can pay for a lot of fire hydrants. So my thing would be, if you wanted to kind of have a stay period, what you would do is you would repeal the tax and then use this to pay down the water bill for the next few years and then add it to a future revenue stream need. That's the way I would do it, because you can't use this for any other use. It's already an earmarked restricted use. And that's it. So it's really for tonight. Are we on the right path? Are we continuing to do the right thing? Is there anything else to consider that would be reprioritized, if you will? I'm not saying you have to have an answer for tonight. I can provide these, but it would be part of the ongoing budget discussions as we reorganize this or add stuff to it, drop things off, you tell me. So it's just, it helps us as a staff to better prepare when we start going through sometime in early July our early budget proposals.
I think I would move number 4 up, at least one notch. What's infrastructure investments referring to?
It's just making sure that our road paving program
Road,
is always prioritized. That's
road.
why it's the #1 capital item. It takes about 80% of our capital funds bandwidth to continue our road improvement program. So enhancing paving roadways. So it's one where
I think we've done
one
that
thing
though,
that we
right?
have done is at least we
Yeah,
put a
we've
model into effect. So it's at least it's
Mhm.
based off of future revenue needs, sustainable. And that was to basically make sure that we're repairing on average, after we get some of these bigger ticket projects complete, Hillendale Road being a big one, phase 2, roughly 3 miles of roadway per year to keep on pace with a 20-year replacement cycle.
Agreed.
So yeah, you're right. If that's one where this one is like, we've solved that problem, we just need to keep funding it, you can drop it down in terms of a hyper priority. I would still say you might want to separate out maybe some stormwater items to it as well, just to kind of maybe differentiate infrastructure, because it's not all created equal. Because while we did just implement our MS4 permit for the last one, the next one is coming right down the road, and that one will be just as unfunded from the state.
No. Okay.
Okay, yeah, just, you can email me and we can reconvene and discuss any kind of reordering of stuff, but I'll definitely take anything you need offline.
Yeah, and you,
Just because like.
Oh, yeah, like I'm saying,
Like,
this is your budget, this is your priorities,
Yep,
you tell us
we
what
can
you want
add.
to do.
track.
but strong financial management, that's like expected.
One would hope so.
That shouldn't
One
even
would hope
be on there like as an option.
I put it
right?
up there as
I
like,
think it's also fixed. I think
yes,
Chris has done a good job of fixing it too.
Organizational excellence fixed.
I can put that as a header at the top of the budget,
Fixed.
so it's just looking at you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
there we
Okay.
go.
So that would move everything.
Maintaining strong financial management by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Agree.
Keep in reminder that when we started talking about this a few years ago,
Right.
we had a $1 million deficit. That was why.
In the budget.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You've
I
already-
think fixed.
Got that fixed.
Promises kept, check mark. Put a big old banner on your aircraft carrier. Mission accomplished.
I thought that was the banner name, yeah. Yeah, like I said, this is completely up for resorting. If there's anything that you think is not present here, that's an issue that we as a township have control over, that we're not as priority. This is just, in the meantime, while we had to do the financial adjustments, it was one where if we're gonna reinvest, it was doing things that are going to increase revenues, add values, and address one of our largest cost problems. That's why those are the top four.
To give you some feedback so that you.
Between
can
now and
continue on.
July.
Yeah, but you- No, no, I think sooner the better.
Okay, yes, it helps tremendously. Because these directives then go to the individual departmental requests, and whether or not some will request more than others.
Right.
So, thank you. That's all I have.
Great. Is there a motion to adjourn?
No. You haven't let me have my,
Okay. Is there any comments from the board?
yes, there's an election tomorrow. Make sure you all vote tomorrow, unless you're an independent, in which case, sleep in. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy the beautiful day that you have to take care of your children on because the schools are closed. So sorry about that.
I do.
What?
My daughter's home and I had no idea why.
Well, now you know.
Would have voted, but I forgot.
Yep.
Thank you.
So now I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.